Hi, everyone. My name is Christina Stucker-Gassi. I'm NCAP's Healthy Food and Farms Program Manager. And to start us off, I want to just take a minute to share a acknowledgement. NCAP staff reside on the stolen and occupied lands of the Chehalis, Kalapuya, Malala, Northern Paiute, Shoshone-Bannock, Tenino, and Wasco people. Staff are exploring land taxes to these nations and Indigenous-led organizations in our region as recognition of our access to stolen Indigenous land. If you or your organization want to learn more about this step to support Indigenous people, check out the link that I'll drop in the chat from the Native Governance Center.
Thank you, Christina, for that important acknowledgement. Excellent. So we will go ahead and jump into our series. Thank you again for being here. This is our second time doing this, so we are just excited to have this opportunity to share with you all a little bit about what we're doing, and of course, advocacy in the pesticide world, today, really, the purpose is going to be for those interested in joining a community of advocates who are making real change to reduce pesticide use and environmental and human impacts of those pesticides. And so this is a space to come with questions and curiosities about how to help make change in your community. And so, we really welcome just any questions that you have, any community concerns that you're bringing to this circle that you'd like to share. There's going to be an opportunity for a breakout a little bit later, where we can break out into smaller groups to really hear about some of the on-the-ground projects that are happening, not only in the Northwest where NCAP is based, but also around the country. We have a special guest speakers coming from Herbicide-Free Campus, and so we have a packed agenda for you all today, and so we'll go ahead and dive right in. I'm going to give a little background about NCAP. For those who aren't familiar, the Northwest Center for Alternatives to Pesticides was founded in 1977, and our region includes the three Northwest states, Washington, Oregon, and Idaho. And 3 of our program managers currently reside in those 3 states. So we have a good footprint across our region, and really we work to protect community and environmental health and inspire the use of ecologically sound solutions to reduce the use of pesticides. And so, reducing pesticides is really important, but also the ability to implement alternatives, because, pests are certainly a problem across our region and the globe, really. But how can we address these issues without, contaminating our waterways and our environments and our bodies, right? And so really we're looking at what are those alternatives that we can be implementing to take care of our pest problems. And NCAP works across in 3 program areas across 5 campaigns. So our 5 campaigns, just to give you an idea of like where we work, is our Healthy Homes and Gardens campaign. We have Safe and Pesticide-Free Workplaces and Institutions campaign, Thriving Ecosystems, Pesticide-Free Food and Farming, and Pesticides in the Climate Crisis. So we're really busy here at NCAP, and we have lots to do, as we know, for those that are on the call, that pesticides are a problem in our community. And so we're really excited to just be here with you all to share some of what we're doing, hear from Herbicide Free Campus on what they're doing, and hopefully hear what you all are doing in your communities as well. So today we're going to cover a little bit about pesticide history and the culture of control through advocacy, through like an advocacy lens, right? So what were some of the points in history that led to where we are today, right? Because pesticides were created, and it wasn't really until we started seeing things becoming extremely contaminated, right, that the alarms began to be sounded that there are pesticides out there that are extremely dangerous and harmful, right? So what did that history kind of look like? And we're also going to talk a little bit about present day policy and preemption. If you don't know the word preemption, don't worry, you will know what it is after this call. And again, hearing a little bit about community action, what's happening on the ground. And let's see, for those that complete the evaluation for this event, you're going to be entered in to win a raffle, kind of like a drawing of this awesome, amazing Patagonia backpack. So we'll be sending the link out at the end of today, at the end of the session, and then also again with a follow-up email. So if y'all could fill out the evaluation, then you'd be entered to win this gold backpack. Excellent. So, I mean, just a little bit of background on pesticides, right? I just want to just touch base a little bit on like, where did pesticides come from, right? And so Shay is going to go into much further detail about some of the history of pesticides, but you know, really we've depended upon pesticides for as long as humans have depended upon agriculture, right? So once we started to really begin like growing food in abundance, right? And kind of these more designed ways, like we realize, oh, we're having pest problems, right? And so pest control has existed for a really, really long time, right? But the way that we're seeing pest control happen nowadays with some of these like synthetic and harmful chemicals, right, hasn't always been the way things have been done. And so, you know, back in the day, you know, we used natural products like nicotine or, you know, tobacco, right, to deter pests, things like chrysanthemums to produce basically plant-based pesticides. But now, fast forward into the future, we see things that are much different on the market. And so I'm going to go ahead and pass the microphone here to Shay. And Shay, how did pesticides become the standard of control in our society today? Can you help us understand that a little bit better?
Yeah, I'd be happy to, Dominica. So go ahead to the next slide, please. So pesticides have been around for a super long time, as Dominica was just referring to. So right around the time of the World Wars is when we really were starting to see the development of pesticides. Specifically, World War I, we're seeing a lot more insecticides developed for weapons of war. So basically, they were taking insecticides and developing them as byproducts of nerve gas and explosives. And then cyanide and arsenic were also taken. They were usually used to fumigate orchards, but then they started using that towards methods of, you know, control and war. So and that actually caused somewhat of a problem for agriculture because they didn't have the tools that they had in their toolbox originally. So in right around World War II, we start to see DDT being created and used for disease carrying insects. Because right around that time, we were seeing, typhus, malaria, a lot of the diseases that were earlier that we were really concerned about. So, you know, how do we control it is we use the tools that we have in our toolbox, which was at that time, these pesticides that are being rolled out. So right around 1945, we start to see an unrestricted release for civilian use, and we're starting to see DDT being more commonplace in the American home and around the American home. Next slide.
Excellent, thanks, Shay. And so what did the earliest forms of environmental advocacy look like? Like, what did it take for us to, you know, get to that point of people kind of standing up and saying, hey, this is a problem?
Well, we didn't actually see a change until, surprisingly, until 1962. This is when we started to see a shift for the environmental advocacy movement and getting a real focus on, you know, what was happening when we're using these pesticides, seeing environmental contamination. And basically, Rachel Carson, who you see in this photo here, she was a biologist and a science writer for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And she was the first to actually merge these ideas, so the conservation and public health movement into the environmental movement. And this was through her book titled Silent Spring. And basically in this book, she specifically looks at DDT and how it affects human and environmental health. Next slide.
So how has the global environmental movement inspired state level advocacy?
So right around all the stuff that was happening in 1962 with Rachel Carson, and that was like on a more globalized scale. People all over the world knew about Rachel Carson. So that kind of transferred over into a localized forming of coalitions and unions. So right around the same time in 1962, the United Farm Workers of America, which is a US farm worker labor union, they formed. And for the last 15 years, the UFW has allowed farm workers and organizations more equitable policies. So this could be anything from immigration reforms to pesticide protections, heat standards, hazard pays, and any other worker protections that you see today.
Yeah, that's really important. And I think it's really interesting to note just the importance of the action of these two kind of examples that we provided, both Rachel Carson and the UFW, because what happened in the 1970s is in the 1970s, the government formed several of the kind of legislation that we see today that protects a lot of the things that these folks were like saying, right? So in 1970, we have the Clean Water Act was passed. The OSHA was developed, so that's the Occupational Safety Health Administration. We had the Endangered Species Act was passed in the 1970s. And so, you know, really, it took people standing up and speaking out in order for the government to kind of step up and realize that there were some protections needed. And so it's just interesting to realize that, you know, pesticides really originated from a time of war, right? And so, yeah, I mean, definitely, you know, to serve a purpose, and then was released out into the world, right, for everyone to be able to access. And we started to see those impacts. And then it wasn't until folks really started to, again, like stand up and protest these impacts that we saw the response of the national government. And so that's something that we just want to highlight a little bit today, because we are all here because hopefully, you know, because we're interested in advocacy, specifically pesticide advocacy. And so we wanted to provide some examples in history. And these are not the only ones, right? There's many examples in history, especially, you know, recently with the banning of glyphosate in Mexico, right? That it really takes folks standing up and speaking out against sometimes some pretty powerful corporations to make change in their communities. And so it doesn't happen all on its own, unfortunately. So we're just happy that y'all are here to join us in this conversation, because we're here to help to continue this pesticide reform movement, right, to protect community and environmental health. So the question is, like, what are we capable of together? We're all here to learn a little bit more, maybe to share a little bit. And so I want to pass the podium here to my colleague Christina, who's going to help us understand a little bit more about present day policy and that word preemption that I mentioned earlier, because, you know, we would think that, right, pesticide advocacy is, oh, it's easy, we don't want this in our community, and so therefore we can go and we can make that change easily. Unfortunately, because of the way that, you know, things are set up and the power that certain, you know, governments have, it's not quite that simple. And so we have to be really, you know, we have to come together. We have to like create our tactics to be able to create change. Unfortunately, it's just not going up and saying, we want this banned. So I'm gonna go ahead and pass it to Christina, who can explain a little bit more about all of that.
Cool. I'll try and touch on a number of different present day policies, battles that we're currently working on, and that, you know, you can get involved with, and that many of our partners are also involved with. But I'll start by just defining what preemption is, because it does play into what we can actually achieve together. So preemption is the ability of one level of government to override laws of a lower level. So in the triangle on the screen, at the top, there's the federal government, and then there's state laws underneath that. And then at the bottom, there's municipal or city laws. And while local governments once had the ability to restrict the use of pesticides on land under their jurisdiction, pressure from the chemical industry led many states to pass legislation that actually prevented cities from adopting local pesticide ordinances, which affects the use of pesticides on private property. And the preemption laws made it so that the local governments couldn't pass laws that are more restrictive than state governments. So in the next picture, the next slide, you can see a map of the United States. And in orange is where there's major barriers to local control. So strong preemption laws at the state level that would make it so that any laws passed on a local level that were stricter than the state laws would be struck down. So they wouldn't be able to happen. You might think of other areas where preemption has come into play in your community. For example, plastic bag bans. There's a lot of states that passed state level legislation to prevent municipalities or cities from passing plastic bag bans. Like where I'm at in Idaho, we have a law like that. And we also have strong pesticide preemption laws preventing, say, my city of Boise from banning glyphosate or Roundup, for example. So that's what preemption is. And you can see what color your state is. In our region, Washington has some petition control. And in 2019, Mayor Jenny Durkin of Seattle passed an executive order restricting city departments from using pesticides containing Roundup on Seattle-owned properties. Seattle also currently has 22 pesticide-free parks and 250 pesticide-free zones, including play areas for children, picnic sites, and community food gardens. There's also been some success in Oregon and even in Idaho, not banning pesticides, but cities taking on efforts to limit the use of certain pesticides on city-owned property. But then when you extend out of city-owned property to private-owned property, the preemption laws make it really difficult for bans to be upheld. So if you've ever thought about, like, why doesn't my city just ban glyphosate? We've been hearing about how it's tied to cancer, and there was those lawsuits in California where a landscape, like a maintenance person, was awarded a large amount of money. It's not always that easy, and but there's good examples of wins that we can replicate. And if you live in one of the states where there's no local control, you can always change that. You can build power to change that law at the state level to make preemption no longer an issue. So there's always things to do. And there's more good news around federal changes, which would affect everyone, even if your state has preemption laws. Recent example is the ban of Clipirophos, which is a pesticide that has been around since the 60s and has strong links to neurological damage in both adult users and particularly damaging impacts for children who are exposed. Talking about, like, the history of control and how it's been related to really unjust pesticides. Toxic pesticides in particular have an intertwined history with unjust practices in the United States. Clipirophos has been known to be damaging for decades. In the 60s, there was a study commissioned by Dow Chemical, who was the original manufacturer of Clipirophos, and they actually tested on 13 men who were incarcerated, and it's since been denounced as inhumane and unethical. But that original study, which became the bedrock of why Clipirophos was considered safe enough and approved at the federal level, was actually falsified. And I can share a link if you're interested in learning more about that history. It is very eye-opening and connects to something we talk a lot about, which is the control of a lot of our federal policy and our state policy through preemption by large chemical companies. And they're in control of a lot of the narrative around toxic pesticides. So together we can change that. And the recent banning of Clipirophos for food uses at the federal level is an example of that. It took many decades, but now that it's happened, people are more aware, and we look forward to many more wins like that. It's exciting stuff. I feel the momentum building.
Yeah, definitely. Christina, I think it's interesting because Clipirophos, it wasn't banned right at the beginning, right? It wasn't like, it didn't just take 1 year. It took multiple tries. And I'm thinking specifically of in Oregon, right? Because they tried to ban Clipirophos here in Oregon, and it didn't stick. And so I think it's interesting that there was multiple tactics that were tried. And, I think that at first it was very much so a tactic of that it was harming the environment. And unfortunately, that is the tactic that didn't stick. And ultimately, really highlighting the dangers that Clipirophos poses to children and to farm workers was really what, hit that home run of being able to ban Clipirophos at the federal level. And so just highlighting the fact that sometimes it doesn't work at the first try, but, we learn and we keep on coming back. And at this point, Clipirophos has been banned at the federal level. So, we have to stick with it sometimes and sometimes just shake up our tactics.
Totally. So Dominica, you can talk more about these as well, but just a few skills to build in advocacy, whether you're pushing for something locally, and if you're pushing against preemption, or if you are in a state where you can affect these changes without changing preemption laws, and even, and a lot of things when it comes to advocacy, these skills are really useful.
Definitely. I think that sometimes it's, good to build your skills and certainly always build your network. That's one thing that I learned really young, is that sometimes it is who you know, and that's really important. And so being able to build your network and call upon people, even if it's to call upon someone to like nudge someone else, that's always really helpful. And, one thing that's on here is artivism. I don't know if y'all have heard of that, but just being creative and, we all have different skills to bring. And so just really recognizing that, the movement really, it takes everyone, and all the skills that people bring to the table are are useful and can be incorporated in one way or another. I really like spreadsheets. I'm not very good at drawing at all. So maybe my skill will be more in helping to organize and not so much do the mural. But there are definitely different ways that people can bring their skills. And I think that we're going to go next into just hearing more about some of the on-the-ground projects. So we heard a little bit about the history, right? There's certainly a lot more on history. So if anybody's interested in learning more about pesticide history, you should definitely reach out to us, because we've done a couple presentations specifically on the history of pesticides. So we had to cut a lot out on that. But also thinking about, right, like what are some of the barriers and challenges to actually creating change in our communities due to policy and advocacy, right? What Christina just mentioned about preemption, some of these skills that we could be bringing. And so now let's hear about like what's actually going on the ground. And I'm going to pass it back to Christina to talk to us a little bit about some of the work that's going on in her city there in Boise, Idaho.
Yeah. So I'll keep this, pretty brief. Boise is not the only city looking to reduce pesticides, but I do live here and I do know a fair amount about what our program looks like. And NCAP is hoping to help other municipalities pilot pesticide use reduction pilots based off what Boise is doing. So as a general overview, thankfully we already have a lot of interest from the city on doing this. They've had what's called an integrated pest management plan for several decades now, which is a way of thinking about pesticide use more intentionally and trying to identify other options for managing unwanted species and then using chemicals as a last resort. So we see pesticide use reduction pilots as a natural outgrowth for cities who have already looked at reducing their chemical unwanted species management. And it's it's a deep dive into the city's values when it comes to protecting their community from toxic pesticides and living up to those values. And the way that the pesticide use reduction pilots do that is by being really true, real and transparent about the numbers. So it's a deep dive into how much money is being used, how much of every chemical that's being procured by the city is used on an annual basis, and getting that data really locked in, and then figuring out how things can be done differently. What pesticides are of most concern that we need to find alternatives for with right away. And there's various ways of doing it. Some cities want to go all organic. Boise's kind of in between. They're going to be revisiting. So they're in the pilot program Boise's doing is 3 years. So they have all the numbers. They're being really transparent about their process with the community. They're asking for input. And then they're piloting new alternatives on about 12 different sites across the city. So these are parks, mostly parks, but also right-of-ways and city buildings. And they're seeing if people notice the difference. They're seeing if people mind some aesthetic differences, or if the cost of more labor for like hand weeding can be justified. And we're still in the middle of that process, but so far we found a lot of community support for taking steps to reduce glyphosate for sure. Glyphosate's being phased out of city use. Also a class of pesticides called neonicotinoids, which have been found to be extremely detrimental for pollinators. they're also being phased out. And then there's a couple of situations where NCAP is having to push a little bit to see if there are some alternatives that we can help them develop. So for example, the last use of neonicotinoids to control white grub in sod, ideally there'd be no neonicotinoids, but if there isn't already a practical alternative, and if NCAP didn't exist to help maintenance staff find that, then it would be easier to resort to that toxic pesticide. So that's an example of what we're doing to promote pesticide use reduction pilots, and we're hoping to expand to other cities around the Northwest with a new funding source starting next spring. And that project is currently under development. So if your city might be interested, I'd love to hear from you and get connected to see if the pesticide use reduction pilot that we're doing is right for where you live. And I'll pass it back to Dominica to talk a little bit more about some of our other projects.
Great, thanks, Christina. Yeah, so important, and that's great news that there's opportunity for other cities to do the same. And so, yeah, definitely, if there's any interest, please let us know. Yeah, and so I'll go into a little bit more about some more of our projects on the ground. And we're working specifically to reduce exposure for frontline communities, those who are most impacted by pesticide exposure. And so when we think about who that might be, really our a safe and pesticide-free workplaces and institutions campaign comes to my mind. And so those who work with pesticides, right? If you're at home and you're making the decision to put pesticides on, it's okay, well, but if you work in a place where you might not have that choice, right? What are ways that we might be able to reduce our exposure and any of those health impacts that pesticides have? And so for me, just recognizing that, advocacy comes in a variety of forms, and certainly building community and listening to those who are at the front lines of pesticide issues. And so we're really building and growing our Spanish programming to work directly with Spanish-speaking farm workers and landscapers across the state of Oregon. We are really focusing on 6 counties, several rural counties east of the Cascades, because we recognize that there are a lot of farm workers who work on the dry side of the mountain. I'm in Central Oregon, and so just recognizing that there's a lot of big ag here, and there's a lot of folks who work in big ag. And so how are they being supported to help support their own health? And so we're facilitating conversations with folks to learn more about the needs, right, of folks who are experiencing exposure to pesticides, but also to just continue the conversation about how we can better protect ourselves from exposure, and how we can protect our family, and also tying in just the importance of general health and nutrition. And so really just, it's kind of like a completely different approach, right, to pesticide reduction, is that, increasing the overall knowledge of individuals who are working with pesticides. And so there are several kind of federally mandated trainings that people need to have who work with and around pesticides. But what we're hearing is that those trainings are not enough. It kind of gives the bare minimum, right? And so those trainings could be either the worker protection standards that farm workers and pesticide handlers need to take, or the actual pesticide handler certification that you get from ODA. And so just learning that those aren't enough and people want to continue the conversation. And so we're there to help facilitate those conversations and hopefully elevate local leaders through this process and help to inform state level policy, because again, the importance of making that lasting change through the legislature is really, how we create that momentum, and then hopefully we can change some of the rules and policies in place so that we can have better protections. And so having conversations with the community, specifically Spanish speaking community, has been a great way for us to really expand our advocacy. And without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and pass it to our guest speakers. Herbicide Free Campus, Eliza and Gabriel and Bridget are here, Gabriel, who can talk to us a little bit more about some of the projects that they're working on, not only in the Northwest, but across the country. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having us. I have a couple slides to share if we're able to. Oh, okay, awesome.
Yeah, I can go ahead and stop sharing. And then I think, Laura, do you mind making Eliza co-host?
She did it.
Perfect. Okay, I'm gonna stop.
Okay. Let me present. Can everyone see the screen?
Yeah, we see the presenter view.
Okay.
But we do see the presentation.
That's okay. Let's see how I can change. Oh, here we go. Okay, cool. So that's where, yeah, thank you all for having us. We really love working with NCAP and just the aligned missions that we all have. And I'm actually calling from the Columbia River Gorge, and I work with Spanish-speaking communities here, and they've received training from NCAP and Dominica, and it's so awesome to be able to talk with them about this work, which is close to all of our hearts. And yeah, so I am the director of partnerships for Herbicide Free Campus, which is a youth-led nonprofit that focuses on eliminating herbicides on university campuses. So we just heard the amazing work of different municipalities and different programs that are training frontline workers. We have focused on a kind of niche realm of working with groundskeepers at universities who also often don't have a say in using pesticides, and we mobilize students through leadership trainings and advocacy to kind of be the voice on their campuses for telling the administration and working with the groundskeepers and saying, we don't want herbicides being sprayed on our campus anymore. Here's what we're going to do about it. And so we're super excited. We have Bridget here, who's one of the co-founders, and Cabo, who is one of our students at Brandeis University in Massachusetts. So kind of get a breath of what we're working on. But we've been running HFC for about 4 years, and Bridget and Mackenzie started the organization at UC Berkeley, which is where this picture is, in 2017, and managed to work to eliminate glyphosate at all the UC campuses, and then also do a couple of transitions of the land from conventional herbicides to organic. And we currently have worked with over 20 universities, but are primarily working with 6 really strongly right now to get their campaigns up and elevated to a kind of local, statewide, and hopefully national level. And so our vision is that Herbicide Free Campus is working to create a toxin-free world created by student action. And our mission is really to empower this next generation of environmental leaders to create safer and more sustainable living and learning environments for all, and starting locally and advocating for organic land care on their campuses. We see a lot of the people in this work of an older generation, and the elder wisdom is incredibly important for this work, but really trying to bring in this youth voice to this movement and connect it really to climate change, to exploitative labor, to this really trying to get the paradigm to shift over what the focus on aesthetics over value, over human value, and really bring, which I really appreciate NCAP for doing too, the human voice to this, is that it's definitely an environmental issue, herbicides, but it's also a really big human issue. So talking about it in that realm. Now I'm going to pass to Bridget to give a little history.
Great, thanks, Eliza. So as Eliza mentioned, I was one of the co-founders of Herbicide Free Cal, which has thus evolved into Herbicide Free Campus in its present day iteration. And so, this whole campaign really began in 2017. You can see that first photo. Mackenzie Feldman and I were both beach volleyball players at UC Berkeley, and showed up to practice one day, and our coach was like, hey, if you guys hit this ball over there, don't go get it because they sprayed something, we'll get it tomorrow. And that kind of catalyzed us into this whole journey of, we found out that it was an herbicide using glyphosate that was being sprayed. And so our first course of action was, we called up the groundskeepers and met with them and asked, if we get our team to weed this area, like, will you guys stop spraying herbicides? And it really truly was as simple as that. And we took that idea and shifted it to main campus and had conversations with our groundskeepers and learned how under-resourced and underpaid, understaffed, under pretty much any monetary or physical resource we're talking about, there was a lack of it, labor included. And so thought, what better collaboration than to combine the power of students and of student activism, who, you guys know college students, everybody's trying to get involved. So gave a way to facilitate that, pour that energy into a positive collaboration with our groundskeepers. And so, we hosted weeding days, which is that photo you saw with the artivism and chalk and all those things. But further than that, to make this campaign sustainable, we knew that there needed to be a change of education, or a re-education, because the ways that our grounds crew knew how to manage the space was utilizing these chemicals, right? So like Christina mentioned, Boise, Idaho did, we put on a very similar pilot project of the 2 biggest lawns on campus. And from there, that bolstered the confidence of the grounds crew to know how to manage these smaller lawns without the use of herbicides and pesticides. And then they felt confident in following years to transition this lawn and then that lawn and that lawn, all the while, their work is bolstered by these student helping hands, and their work is visibilized also by these student helping hands, and having, students out there playing music, they're getting to develop relationships with the groundskeepers. And it's just this really beautiful collaboration. And so at the same time that we were doing this more on the ground work, right, in Berkeley, we also knew that this was a much bigger issue to contend with that existed far beyond the confines of Berkeley's campus. And so we really went to work doing a lot of grassroots organizing, like petitioning and writing letters. And we had, students go and read letter to the office of the president, and eventually got glyphosate temporarily banned from all of the UC campuses. And so there was both this bottom up and this top down approach, simultaneously working in tandem to really further our goal. And so we took that idea and expanded it. And so you'll hear from Cabo, who's one of our fellows at Brandeis, in a little bit. But we really wanted to empower other student leaders to do the same sort of approach, and working both with their hands, with the grounds crews, and then also doing more advocacy, really trying to sway the opinions and the outcomes of the decision makers on campuses. And so right now we are working, as Eliza mentioned, with 6 schools for 12 months, and we're pouring all of our energy and resources into training these students at these 6 campuses to be direct organizers and to bring this campaign to their school. And as you might imagine, these 6 campuses all look very different, right? We have one in New York and Massachusetts and Atlanta and California and Iowa, and Indiana. And so they're all facing these very, very unique geographic and cultural obstacles to eliminating and reducing the use of herbicides. And so we're really trying to meet them where they are. And for example, thanks, Eliza. This is an example of one of the exercises we do with the students of trying to, hone in on decision makers. But we really try to individualize the campaign to what each school needs. So for Grinnell College in Iowa, they were full throttle and their grounds crew was on board. And so they just completed a prairie project. So they ripped up lawn and planted all native prairie. So no herbicides used. And it was this amazing, amazing project. And then Sarah Lawrence College in New York, they're a much smaller private institution. And, they realized that step one, we need a sustainability director before we even begin to, think about doing a pilot project, about getting funding for the student campaign. And so our job now is to facilitate and help provide resources and support to our students that are doing the on the ground work. And so with that, I'll pass it to Cabo to talk a little bit about what they're doing at Brandeis.
So hi everybody, I'm Gabo. It's a pleasure to be here and to be talking to everybody and to just share a little bit of what we've been doing. We've been working super hard at Brandeis and having a lot of good headway recently, so it's been super exciting. I originally heard about Herbicide-Free Campus from one of my friends here at Brandeis. I'm an environmental studies major, so it's something that I'm already interested in. And I also have just some history working with gardening and organic gardening and urban gardening and things like that. And so it was just something that I had some experience with and just already interested in. So I jumped on the opportunity. I just listened to all the great things that they had been doing in the past, and it was something that I felt really just had a great message and is something that I wanted to be a part of. So from then we started last semester at Brandeis, and we had a lot of challenges because we didn't really have a grounds director. The position was empty, and so we were kind of just waiting for somebody to be hired. And once someone was hired, they had to get acclimated to the campus and to the what was being sprayed, how things were being treated. And so we really didn't have an opportunity to do a lot regarding the campus and getting to know the grounds crew. But what we did have an opportunity to do was to just really make the group in terms of students, just recruit a lot of students and make the group solidified, have a lot of student positions, and just having a way to delegate our work. And so now this semester, it's been a lot better because obviously we have a grounds director. His name's Chris. We were able to meet him. It's been really great to talk to him and really see how he is more willing to work with us as time goes on as well. I think especially at the beginning, since he was new, he really didn't feel, I think, that comfortable in making decisions, or maybe wasn't sure what we were trying to do, or what our like purpose was. But I think with time, like we've been able to communicate with him more and like just show him that we're there to just help him and help his crew. And that's really one of our main goals, because at the end of the day, they are the ones that are getting affected by all of these pesticides the most, because they're the ones applying them and in direct contact with them for work. And it a lot, again, I don't know the grounds crew yet, but like it happens to be that a lot of times it is people that are like maybe lower income or from marginalized communities, and they are in a space where they have to for work handle these herbicides that are bad for their health. So here in this one of the things that we've been able to do just this week, we hosted our first weeding day. It was actually yesterday, and that's me in those two pictures in the red right there. And so Chris came over and kind of told us what to look out for, what to weed, and we did that. And we're hosting another one tomorrow, which I can't go to because of classes, but we're some of the other fellows will be there, and we're hoping to just get more involvement. We got some new members from the weeding day, people that just wanted to come out and help. So it was a really great way to do that, and also just foster that sense of community and that connection with the grounds crew, and show that the student body is there to help with the grounds, basically. And yeah, so basically our plans as of now is we're doing these types of events like the weeding days and that that bottom up approach, but we're also have a petition going around directed towards the president and the board of the university, trying to get them to accept the transition to organic land care. We're also looking at getting funding for a pilot project on 2 different areas on campus. Another one of the challenges that we faced was finding the areas that they would let us do the pilot projects on, because we wanted to do the bigger lawns, because obviously those are treated a lot and a lot of students use them, and there's just great areas to make change in. However, there were a lot of reservations to that due to like aesthetics and how much foot traffic there is, and student tours and all of that. Which at the end of the day, we understand that isn't necessarily, for example, Chris's decision. That's like the way that the university is trying to present themselves. And a lot of time it's the way the alumni and like people that give money to the university want the university to look. But that's why we're trying to have this change where we can still have campuses that look nice, but with native plants, perennial plants, no herbicides, and having that sense of community of the student body and the grounds crew, just creating a community that works together for like toxic free environment, basically. And yeah, so that's what we've been working on recently, and what we will continue to work on for the semester, and hopefully we can get those pilot projects launched and get the transition going. So that would be great.
Thanks, Gabo. That was awesome.
Yes, that's amazing. I love how you really stress that like building of community. It's so important. And I really enjoyed hearing you all speak about the work of Herbicide Free Campus, because you all are definitely making a change across the nation, and like a wave, right, of change that is growing, and you are creating local leaders, and you are again strengthening community, and just so many of those important aspects of advocacy, right, that we see that work. And so those like positive tactics that again are resulting in positive change. So thank you guys so much. And we are not going to go into breakout rooms today. I think that, you know, we have a good group here. And so what I'm going to do is just open it up for a few minutes to hear if there's any questions or comments or anything anybody would like to share with us. Maybe a little bit about what's going on in your community, any questions you have for Herbicide Free Campus. I'll go ahead and open it up. If you either want to put it in the chat, you can raise your hand, or if you'd like to just come off mute, please, we invite you to do so.
Hi, this is Ashley. I'll just throw out there, after hearing about preemption, I think it's a good reminder when reviewing, the strides that are being made on campuses, that we can still advocate for practice change and for people to just to choose for themselves to change the way that they're doing their business or their city or their campus. And so just not to get discouraged thinking about preemption too much. Yes, let's go after state level policy, but we can also make on the ground change in our communities in different ways. So.
Definitely. Thank you for that reminder. And I think, again, stressing just the diversity of tactics and approaches that we heard today. And so, again, I think Herbicide Free Campus mentioned the bottom up and the top down. And so just remembering that there's kind of different ways to approach our work here.
Yeah, and I can add to that. I think that's one of the most important things to learn for us when we're helping the students, is that not all the schools operate in the same way. So we have a school where they don't have a sustainability director, so they're going straight to the president, or they're working with their operations person. But you have another school where the grounds manager makes all the decisions and they don't have to go to their administration to ask for change. So then you're changing the language and the way that you're structuring your ask, and then the most important thing they want to know is, like, do students support this? Is there initiative behind this? And so you have to do this. We were just talking about this today, this two-pronged approach, like show student support and get the students activated, but also have this like checklist or this like toolkit of this is what we want to accomplish and here's how we're going to get there. So have the the student activism, because a lot of people are like, students are talking about the grounds, like why do students care about the landscape? Like they love that it's green and lush here, instead of this, like, no, students actually want to work and maybe even be paid to manage their campus. And so it's a really cool like systems thinking change of, this campus doesn't have to look like this and take up a ton of water and be really chemical intensive. It can really look totally different and be this like new vision. And our hope is that creates a ripple effect for the community and the town to talk about these like issues. And universities really are a site for change, and have a lot of privilege within them. So if they can activate the change and create this ripple effect, that's what we're hoping for.
Yeah, I love the idea of redefining what's beautiful and what we want a landscape to look like. I think that's an important part of it.
Just wanted to plug a comment I made in the chat about Tacoma Park, Maryland, and how they passed a law in 2013 restricting the use of cosmetic lawn pesticides on both private and public land. Private land, they can choose to do it themselves, even if you live in a state with preemption. But Maryland doesn't have preemption, so just plugging that really cool thing, but also linking it back to the what we were talking about earlier. And we do have time for a couple more questions or comments before we hear a little bit about the evaluation and the Patagonia bag giveaway. And a couple of other things.
I just wanted to say that it was really encouraging to hear how college age folks are getting involved. I feel like that is something that even here at NCAP we discuss all the time, is how can we get people that are just either becoming adults or in college, early college stages, getting involved in advocacy. So awesome work, guys. It's really encouraging. And I also, I had asked a question in the chat to Herbicide Free Campus on how other universities could get involved, and they had dropped their email. So if anybody knows of any universities that would like to get involved with them, please reach out to them. Looks like they have some great toolkits and offer some great support. So
Yes, definitely. Please do follow up with Herbicide Free Campus if you're interested in learning more, and also definitely follow up with us here at NCAP if you'd like to figure out how to start a pilot program in your municipality, in your local region where you live. And yeah, without anything else, if anybody else has any more questions, feel free to stop me here. But if not, we'll go ahead and start wrapping up. I'm gonna share my screen a little bit. Let's see here. For one last plug that we have, I will go ahead and pass it on to Laura, who will mention a little bit about the evaluation. Remember that you can, if you submit the evaluation, you get an opportunity to win a Patagonia bag with an $80 value. So it's a really awesome bag. And then also, Laura will talk a little bit more about this Creepy Crawly campaign that we have.
Yes. So I'm putting the link in the chat right now if you want to support our Creepy Crawly campaign fundraiser. We have some awesome prizes. You can get tickets for just $10 through November 1st. And we have 2 really cool packages that you can enter for a chance to win. One is especially for Eugene area folks, and it's worth almost $600. There's like 20 bags of Love Food Not Waste compost. There's a $200 gift card to Down to Earth, which is an awesome home and garden store in Eugene, and other things for those in the Eugene area. And then if you're not in Eugene area, or if you're interested in the other package, that one is a little over $700 worth of some awesome goodies.